Hello and welcome everybody, it's Matt from Cardboard Odysseys. Got another deck tech for you. So Dr. Madison Lee is going to be a energy focused, well, it's really an artifact deck that gets benefits from being an energy deck as well. So there's some artifact synergy and some energy synergy, so it's kind of a combination of the two, but it's mostly artifacts. Okay, calling it American Energy, which is a funny name because it's Jeskai colors, which is red, white, blue, American. And a buddy of mine who was playing in Modern Horizons 3 recently, the draft, he called it American Mid-Energy, which was pretty funny. So that's what it's called. So, Dr. Madison Lee, 3 mana for a 2/3. Legendary creature, human scientist. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, you get an energy counter. That's mainly what we're focused around. And then the other 3 abilities, you can tap it, pay 1 energy, target creature gets +1, +0, it gains trample and haste. This ability is actually pretty funny. You can use this in a lot of different ways. For instance, one of my buddies, he did this, he cast a spell, it's a black spell that you switch your life total with somebody else, and then you also get a large creature in whatever the difference is. So it's like a 35-35, and I can give it trample, so I was able to make a deal. He was able to kill somebody, or threaten to kill somebody, if I were able to give it +1 in trample. Stuff like that kind of situation. It's kind of niche, but like you could definitely surprise people out of nowhere, giving something +1 in trample and haste until end of turn, which is pretty cool. You can tap it to pay 3 energy and draw a card, and you can also pay 5 energy, tap it, and return target artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. The tapped part that is relevant in some situations, but for the most part, you're going to be looping things that just have enter the battlefield triggers, and that's really all you care about. And I say looping, it's not really like an infinite loop. There are some infinites in the deck, but not a ton. Also, as a side, there is a $500 version. This view is not great, but you'll see, I'll have that linked in the description. This version is like 2K, but it's literally, the only difference is like not playing the dual lands and not playing like one of the more expensive lands. It's basically just lands, you know, if you're not playing the original dual lands, you can drop like a couple thousand off of that. So there is a $500 version. Literally the only thing that changes is just the lands. I'll have both in the description as well. Alright, so Assaultron Dominator. This is a 2 mana 2/2 artifact, which is great. And when it enters the battlefield, you get 2 energy counters, also great. And then whenever an artifact creature you control attacks, you may pay an energy. If you do, you get a 1/1 counter, a first strike, or a trample counter on that creature. This is mainly just to get the energy counters, and then also giving your stuff trample counter is pretty nice, or 1/1 if you're trying to grow a team. It's pretty good, but it's mainly in there for that it is an artifact, that it also gives you energy. You're gonna see that theme a lot. So Brotherhood Scribe, 2 mana for a 1/3 human artificer, not an artifact, but whenever it has Metalcraft, you can just tap it, gain an energy counter, which is great. And artifact or Metalcraft is just as long as you have 3 or more artifacts. Fairly easy to do in this deck. It's kind of centered all around it. And then whenever you get 1 or more energy during your turn, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. Very relevant. It's an anthem. Every time you get an energy, you can get a lot of energy in this deck. So it's 1 or more, so the number of instances is what matters the most, not necessarily the amount of energy you get. But if anything, Brotherhood Scribe turns it on himself. So very, very strong card. You've got Cyberman Squadron, one of the finishers in the deck, 7 mana artifact creature. Non-legendary artifact creatures you control have Myriad, which is whenever a creature with Myriad attacks for each opponent other than defending player, and you may create a token copy that's tapped and attacking that's that player or planeswalker they control exile the tokens in combat. So things like Wormcoil Engine is in the deck. Getting 3 Wormcoil Engines, 3 additional Wormcoil Engines is fairly strong, and you'll get the tokens that come in after that once you exile. Well, it might be a die trigger, so you won't get the tokens but either way, you get, you know, the lifelink death touching 6/6 for free. Stuff like and we'll see more cards that synergize. Anything with enter the battlefield obviously is a benefit. Emery, Lurker of the Lock, 3 mana 1/2, most of the time it's just a 1 mana 1/2 legendary creature, and whenever it enters the battlefield, you mill 4 cards, and then you can tap it, choose target artifact card in your graveyard, and you may cast that card this turn. You still have to pay the cost and everything, and the timing still applies, but this is just kind of like a reanimator situation where you can just bring stuff from the graveyard back and get lots of value. Esper Sentinel, 1 mana 1/1, is an artifact creature, so it's already a win in the deck. And then also whenever an opponent casts their first non-creature spell, Each turn, draw a card unless that player pays X, where X is Esper Sentinel's power. Will you pay the 1? Actually, funny enough, in this deck, it can be more than 1 more often than not. You'll have a variety of different ways to pump the power of Esper Sentinel. So in the very beginning, it's strong, and then in a late game, it's strong. Therium Sculptor, this is just a 2-mana 1/2 that reduces the artifact spells you cast by 1. Pretty good. You got Faladar Guardian. Not an artifact, but when it enters the battlefield, it's 4-mana 1/4. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you may exile another target permanent you control, then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. This, with any kind of clone ability, is just infinite flippings, so you can like bounce the 2 back and forth. And that's really, really good for enter the battlefield triggers and for infinite enter the battlefields and leave sure. So if you have anything that triggers from entering the battlefield, that's what you're going to want to take advantage of. You can take this out if you don't want to do any infinite loops. This is just how I build my decks. Just take off Faladar Guardian and you'll basically remove every infinite that's in the deck besides I think 1. If you go to Commander Spellbook, I think yeah, there's the Faladar Guardian. There's actually more. It doesn't understand. It's trying to use like this Whisper Weaver Angel, so it's the same exact wording as Faladar Guardian, so I don't know why you'd use the 6-drop over a 4-drop. But anyways, these 2 infinites are in the deck with Synth Infiltrator and Phyrexian Metamorph. They are the same as Faladar Guardian, so those 2 infinite enter the battlefield, infinite leave the battlefield. And then of course there's this 4-card combo with another prerequisite that has infinite creature tokens and infinite enter the battlefield. But I mean, obviously this is 4 different cards, or at least 3 different cards. I would keep that combo in the deck. It's very unreliable, but if it happens to happen, if the stars align, you're happy. But either way, even if you don't use this as a combo engine, I still like the idea of flickering something for the enter the battlefield triggers. There's enough in the deck that this would be useful, especially when you have clones in the deck and you can just like reset what they're cloning or whatever. So just still a very versatile, fun card. Goblin Engineer, 2-mana 1/2. It's a Goblin Artificer, not an artifact, but it's still a creature. And when it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an artifact card, put that card into your graveyard, and then you can pay 1 red, tap it, sacrifice an artifact, and then return target artifact card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. This is mainly just in there to tutor something. We'll go over what you tutor, but it's just a wide variety of different cards that you can want to go tutor, and having a sack outlet is also very relevant. Goblin Welder, very similar situation, but it doesn't tutor. But this basically just takes an artifact in your graveyard and an artifact that you have on the field, and then you swap them. It isn't like sacrificing. It sacrifices, but like they're simultaneous, I guess what I'm trying to say. It's like a flip. So you have to choose both targets, and then then it goes on the stack, and then once you pick the targets, like it's kind of already like happening. So you know, they'll know the targets, I guess is what I'm saying. So they can interact in a way as long as they're both, you know, simultaneously on the field. The card's worded in a weird way, but you just flip 2 things. Something on your field and something in the graveyard, you flip them. They both enter the battlefield and enter the graveyard at the exact same time. Okay, you got Guide of Souls. This is one of the things that benefits from entering the battlefield triggers. Whenever it's a 1-mana 1/2, which is really relevant in a Orcish Bowmaster world. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life and you gain an energy counter. So in the infinite flickering, you'd have infinite life and infinite energy, which is very strong, obviously. And then whenever you attack, you may pay 3 energy, and when you do, you put 2 counters on a 2 counters and a flying counter on a target attacking creature. It becomes an angel. This effect doesn't really matter too much. It does a little bit, but if you're already doing infinite stuff, it doesn't really matter. But regardless, this effect right here is just like really why it's in here. This is just kind of just icing on the cake. Joyer, Weatherlight Captain, 4-mana 3/3, Human Artificer. Whenever you cast a historic spell, you draw a card. That's why it's in here. Just some draw engine. Liberator is Urza Battlethopter, 3-mana for a 1/2 with flash, flying, and legendary artifact creature, of course, Thopter. And then you may cast colorless spells and artifact spells as though they had flash, and then whenever you cast a spell, if the amount of mana spent to cast that spell is greater than Urza's Battlethopter's power, you put a 1/1 counter on the Liberator Copter. This effect isn't like too relevant, but it's not bad. You're definitely going to trigger it a few times, but you won't trigger it a ton. But it's mainly just for being able to cast your stuff at instant speed is very strong. You've got Liberty Prime Recharge. This is kind of like the alternate commander that some people use, but they go more Tron style with it. But I just think it's a very strong engine in the deck regardless. So it's a 5-mana, 8/8 Vig Trample Haste, which is already good. It's a legendary artifact creature, so you still get the energy with your commander. And then whenever it attacks or blocks, you have to sacrifice it unless you pay 2 energy, which you should be able to do no problem. But also, it has the ability to tap, sacrifice an artifact, and you get 2 energy, and you draw a card. So it kind of fuels its own attacking, blocking by that, but then also it's a sacrifice outlet, which is relevant, and yeah, pretty cool. As well, Fiddlebender, this is a 2-mana 2/2 Gnome Artificer. It has something called Magical Tinkering. It's kind of like Birthing Pod for artifacts. You sacrifice an artifact by paying a white and tapping him. Search your library for an artifact card with a mana value equal to 1 plus the sacrifice artifact's mana value. Put it on the battlefield and shuffle. It sucks as only as a sorcery, but you know, it is what it is. But yeah, it's basically just Birthing Pod for artifacts, which is great. You got Paladin Dance Steel Maverick, 3 mana for a 3/3 Vig, lifelink artifact creature, which is nice, a synth knight. And you can exile Paladin Dance, and each creature you control that's an artifact or human gains indestructible until end of turn. Your commander is a human, so that's great. And most of the stuff you'll have is artifacts, so it's also great. So just a little, you know, kind of nice little instant board savior, or board wipe savior. But also a 3-mana 3/3 Vig is also pretty nice. And it's an artifact, so it's all good things. You've got Phyrexia Metamorph, 4 mana for a full, well, it's a whatever. It can be 3 mana if you want to pay the 2 life. It's an artifact creature clone. It enters the battlefield as any creature artifact on the battlefield, except for it's an artifact in addition to its other types, which is fantastic. A lot of times you'll just clone the best thing on the battlefield, but the fact that it's an artifact gives you an extra energy, and it has artifact synergies in the deck as well for other things. You know, just very, very universal card, which is great. You've got Spark Double. I love Spark Double. I think Spark Double should probably be in the majority of blue decks, to be honest. It's very strong in non-CDH decks, of course. But it's 4 mana clone, but it can only clone your stuff, and it can clone planeswalkers or creatures, except for if it's a creature enters the battlefield, an additional 1 with counter on it, and if it's a planeswalker, it enters with additional loyalty counter, and it's not legendary. So you can have a copy as Dr. Madison Lee and have 2 triggers per turn, and they can just be out there doing energy stuff. So double the value of your commander, which is really great, but also double the value of any other creature that you have that is really, really great. So just Spark Double is fantastic, but it's creatures you control only. Sphinx of Revelation. This is basically like Sphinx's Revelation, the instant card, but with energy. So it's a 5 mana 4/5 artifact creature, flying, lifelinker, and then whenever you gain life, you get that many energy counters, and then you can pay 3 mana and tap it, pay X energy, draw X cards. So it's just a very good way to utilize some of your energy if you're getting energy overflow and you want to draw a bunch of cards. It's fantastic. And then of course it's a 4/5 flying lifelinker that gives you energy when you hit with somebody, so that's also pretty great. Or just whenever you gain life. And there's a few different ways to gain life, like Guide of Souls, for instance. Steel Overseer, this is just a way to grow your artifacts, because there is a situation where you're going to be gaining like Thopters, 1/1 flying Thopters, and 3/3 artifact robots, and pilots. I don't think they're artifacts. I think they're just colorless. But anyway, 1/1 on every artifact creature you control is very useful. Oh, there's the you'll be making the Karnstructs, the 1/1 artifact creatures that get pumped for every artifact that's on your side of the field, which is very synergistic with this deck, and this just helps them grow bigger and larger, and it's a way to win the game. You've got Synth Eradicator. This card, I am not 100% sold on. I've played with it. I think I'll need more playtesting with it. But it's very awkward. It's a 3 mana 3/3 artifact creature with haste, which is pretty good. It's got Lightning Bolt on a stick, which is fantastic. But it gets a little funky because whenever you attack, you exile the top card of your library. That seems fine. You may get 2 energy. If you don't, you can play that card this turn. So like you exile a card, it puts you in a weird situation because you have to play the cost of the spell. It could just be a land, so you know, if you've already played your land, which I probably would swing first, but it puts you in this weird situation where you're like, well, I want it to generate me energy, but then I also want to play the card that it exiles. So then you're in the situation where like, do you play the energy? It's just a weird decision point. And then also the tap ability on it, if you attack with it to get the energy, you can't then use it to... It just, I don't know. It's very conflicting for me. Let me know in the comments what you guys think about this guy. So far in playtesting, it has done okay. It's kind of gotten rid of a few cards that I didn't want and gave me energy, so it's like a decent energy generator, but like, I don't know. It's very awkward. Synth Infiltrator, 5 mana. This is one of those artifact clones, which is fantastic, but this has Improvise, where you can tap your artifact to help cast a spell, and it reduces its colorless by 1 colorless. And it enters the battlefield as any creature on the battlefield, except for that it's a synth artifact creature in addition to his other types. So this with Feldar Guardian is infinite looping, boom boom, bang boom, pretty good. Or of course it could just come in the battlefield as any cool creature that's on the battlefield. The Motherlode Excavator, 5 mana for 5/5 legendary artifact creature robot. When this enters the battlefield, you choose target opponent, and you get an amount of energy equal to the number of non-basic lands that player controls. Now, this can be a lot of energy. Even if it's just a couple energy, it's still fairly good. Because it's entered the battlefield trigger, you can flicker it, do it a bunch of times, which is always really good. Or you can exile it to the grave, or sacrifice it to the graveyard and then bring it back. Yeah, so, then it also has, whenever the Motherlode attacks, you can pay 4 energy, and then when you do, destroy target non-basic land defending player controls, and creatures that player controls with flying can't block this turn. This, without flying is a very strange thing, but I guess it's fine. I mean, not every player plays flying, so it's kind of like a sort of unblockable in some situations. But I like the energy on the enter the battlefield trigger, and I like to be able to destroy our lands, because there are some lands, like Valakut and some other, like the Rogue's Passage, for instance, those kind of lands that have like so much value. Being able to get rid of them is pretty nice, so yeah. Thought Monitor, this is one of those cards that has a lot of value from the enter the battlefield triggers, and this is really all it's used for. It's basically, it says it's a 7 mana 2/2, but it's got an affinity for artifacts, which means that its colorless is reduced by 1 per every artifact that's on the battlefield. So in this kind of deck, it's going to almost always be 1. It might be 2, but you have artifact lands, and you've got all kinds of other artifacts in the deck, so you shouldn't ever really be paying more than 1 or 2 for this card. But then it is a flying 2/2 that whenever it enters the battlefield, you draw 2 cards. And you'll want to do things like, with Myriad with this is pretty dang great. You'll draw 6 cards. It's pretty awesome, because all of those tokens from Myriad will enter the battlefield, and you'll draw 2 for each one of them. That's pretty dang good. You've got Volatile Stormdrake. This card is fantastic. It is basically Gilded Drake, but with energy. So 2 mana 3/2. It's a little bit of a better creature because it has flying and hexproof from activated and triggered abilities. But when it enters the battlefield, you exchange control of something, your Volatile Stormdrake and something that an opponent controls, a creature that opponent controls. You get 4 energy. And then you sacrifice that creature unless you pay an energy or an amount of energy equal to its mana value. The thing I like about this is it's like slightly better than Gilded Drake, because if you just want that creature off the battlefield, like it's a stacks piece or something, this is kind of a removal spell because you just choose not to pay the energy. So you just sacrifice it. They still get the 3/2, but that's fine. If you're playing something like Homeward Path, I think it's what it's called, that land that like gives you your stuff back, you can do this and then take it back, which is kind of funny. You don't really like get to, unless you flicker it, you don't really get to do it again, but either way, you could probably do that kind of loop if you'd like. But yeah, just a very strong, versatile card, and yeah. You got Wormcoil Engine, spoke about this earlier. It's so it's a dies trigger, so if you have to, Myriad, you won't get the colorless, these tokens when it dies, but that's still fine, unless you have a sacrifice outlet, which we do have a couple of, so that's pretty good. So it's just a 6 mana 6/6 Death Touch, indestructible, lifelinking artifact creature, Phyrexian Worm, and then when it dies, you get a 3/3. It basically splits it in half. You get a 3/3 colorless artifact creature with Death Touch and 1 with lifelink. We've got Jolted Awake. This is just a kind of a little reanimator for sorcery, and it's also got cycling on it, which is just fantastic. 1 mana, choose up to 1 target artifact or creature card in your graveyard. You get 2 energy, and then you may pay any amount of energy equal to that card's mana value. If you do, you return it from the graveyard to the battlefield. So reanimate for energy. Pretty cool. And then if you don't need to do it, you can just cycle it. Very versatile. This card I'm not 100% sold on. When I first read it, I misread it. Or maybe I misreading it or whatever. But anyways, it's 5 mana for sorcery. Destroy all creatures. So it's like a board wipe, but you get energy equal to, or you get 1 single energy counter, and then you can pay 1 energy or more. If you do, each creature you control with power equal to the amount of energy paid this way gains indestructible till end of turn. I thought it was equal to or less. So I thought, like, if you had like a bunch of 1 through 4 drops, you'd be able to pay 4 energy and save all of them. But you actually have to match their power. So it makes this card significantly less powerful, but with Dr. Madison Lee, she has the target creature gets +1/+0 and trample or whatever. She can kind of manipulate the power. For instance, I was able to cast this, and I had a bunch of 3/3s and a Dr. Madison Lee. I tapped it and made Dr. Madison Lee a 3/3 with her own ability, and I was able to save all my stuff. So it's pretty good, but it's less good because it's not that power or less. It's just that power. So you have to kind of look at your battlefield and just pick the most stuff. But it's a board weapon. I think most decks need at least 1 or 2. And this has the ability to save some of your stuff. So that's pretty good. And I like that. I like board wipes that continue progressing your side of the field. I don't like when there's just like Blasphemicide, you just destroy everything, and then like you're not really any more ahead than you were when you cast it. You're just less behind. Is kind of how I look at it. This actually puts you ahead because you're not only destroying everything, you're also keeping some of your stuff. Hopefully all of your stuff, if you can kind of make a way to make all their power the same. Okay, Suppression Ray. So it's a 5-mana sorcery. It's one of those modal cards, so it's I don't know how to. Oh, here we go. It's one of those modal cards, so it's a land on the other side. I kind of look at this as like a half a land to a full land. I kind of treat it like a full land, but a buddy of mine argued that it's probably about more like a half a land because some of the times you want to do this stuff. But yeah, so 5-mana sorcery, tap all creature target player control, so it's a sleep, but you can pay X energy, and then you choose up to X target creatures tapped this way, and you can put a stun counter on each of them. So the next time they would untap, they don't untap. That's pretty crazy. The fact that it's on the back of a land, that's a very relevant land. It is enter the battlefield tap, but that's fine. Most of the dual ones are. It's just a very strong effect to have access to on a land. Aether Spike, so 2-mana instant, choose target spell, you get 2 energy, and then you may pay any amount of energy. Counter that spell unless the controller pays 1 for each amount of energy paid this way. This is just a simple counter spell if you think about it at the surface, but it actually is an interesting one. So they won't know the value of X until they let it resolve. So like they can't say, okay, it resolves, and then like you say you pick 4 energy and they have 3 mana and a fetch land. They won't be able to fetch land to pay that energy when you pick 4. It's the moment you pick the number as it resolves. So like you don't pick your number before it resolves, you pick it after it resolves. So basically they won't have that mana, like fetch lands and stuff like that. It's a really weird situation, but basically the players that like don't fetch right away and they like want to fetch in response, they have to do it before you choose your number. It's one of those minutia things where you're just like, in most situations in like a friendly game, you probably don't have to like, you know, behold them to it, but that's how it would work in a tournament situation. Battlecat Blast, 5-mana instant, improvise. You can tap your artifacts in order to help pay for some of the color list, and then Battlecat Blast deals 5 damage to any target. If XX damage was dealt to a permanent this way, create that many tap the treasure tokens. I like this because it's a little expensive, but the improvise helps cast it, and then getting the treasures is pretty nice. So like you can kill like an Esper Sentinel and get 4 treasures. You've dealt with a very powerful threat, and you've also gotten 4 treasures to use for later date. You also pump up your creatures as well at instant speed. Those constructs that I talked about earlier, those will just get massively stronger if you do that like in the middle of combat, for instance. Stuff like that, just weird little situations. It looks expensive, but I still think it's worth running. Desynchronization, 4-mana instant, return each non-land permanent that's not historic to its owner's hand. Another one of those things where it's like it's like the artifact version of the 7-mana Cyclonic Rift, except for this is a lot cheaper, and there are some things you want to bounce back to your hand, so the fact that they're non-historic is actually pretty good. Like Feldar Guardian, for instance, you'll get some more value from bouncing and then playing it again. So this keeps you in a forward momentum while also putting your opponents back, and then hopefully you are trying to win as soon as you cast this kind of situation. Dispatch, a really solid removal. It's basically Swords to Plowshare or Path of Exile, but with no downside. The only downside being is that if you don't have Metalcraft, it's just a tap. Just tap target creature. But if you have Metalcraft, you exile that creature. It's very easy to have Metalcraft. Just be careful. Somebody can remove something of yours, and if they can turn off Metalcraft, they will only tap their creature and not exile it. So just try to have a little bit more than the 3 if you can. Electro Siphon, 3-mana instant, counter target spell, and you get a number of energy equal to its mana value. It's basically mana drain, but for energy, which is pretty cool. And then I think mana drain's next. Hey, look at that. Mana Drain is really, really solid counterspell. There's not a ton of interaction in this deck. There's like 7 instants, I think. But the ones that are in here, I think, are very, very synergistic. And Mana Drain, yes, it is a counterspell for 2 blue. But at the beginning of the next main phase, you add an amount of colorless equal to that spell's mana value. So you're going to want to try to counter something that has a decent amount of mana, and then you get to cast all your artifacts with it. So it's very synergistic in that way. Not only is it a counterspell, but you also can gain a ton of value from the extra mana that it gives. So it's kind of ramp as well. Path to Exile, we talked about this. It's just a one white instant exile target creature, and they go get a basic land on the battlefield tapped. Rush of Inspiration, this is another one out of those modal cards where they have a land on the back. So I kind of, like I said, it's basically a land to me. But it's a 3 mana instant, draw 2 cards and discard a card at random unless you pay 2 energy. I've only played the deck I think 3 or 4 times, but I've always just used the land portion. I've never really needed the card draw because the deck has a good amount, but it's there if you need it. Maybe you would want to discard as well. So Swords to Plowshare, this is just a 1 mana instant, exile target creature's controller gains life equal to its power. You got Teferi's Protection. I think is kind of needed. You're going to be doing a bunch of cool stuff, and you're going to want to save your stuff. This is just a way to keep yourself protected. 3 mana instant. Until your next turn, your life total can't change, and you gain protection from everything. All permanents you control phase out. While they're phased out, they're treated as though they don't exist. They phase in before you untap during your next end step, or next untap step, and then you exile it. Doesn't go to your graveyard. Aetherworks Marvel. Now we're in the artifacts. 4 mana, legendary artifact. Whenever a permanent you control is put into a graveyard, you get 1 energy counter, and then you can tap it to pay 6 energy. Look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may cast a spell from among them without paying its mana cost, but the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. This one with Unwinding Clock is very strong. Obviously, being able to play stuff for free is always very strong, but yeah, being able to sacrifice artifacts and you get energy. Fetch lands, you get energy. Yeah, this version has fetch lands in it, but the $500 version does not, so you lose a little bit of value. So you can add the fetch lands if you want. It's synergistic with this. This is a Mana Rock, Arcane Signet. Automated Assembly Line, one of the ways to get infinite in the deck. But like I said, it's very, it's not in here for that, but it just happens to work. So mana, anyway, I have played with it as well. It's fairly strong, being able to just create 3/3s with just paying 3 energy. So it's a 2 mana artifact. Whenever 1 or more artifact creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, you get an energy, and then you can pay 3 energy, create a tapped 3/3 colorless robot artifact creature token. So it's just it's literally just an assembly line to create robots. You have to make sure that you attack each individual person, and you'll get a maximum of 3 energy, minimum of 1, as long as you do combat damage, because it's whenever 1 or more. So you have to do damage to multiple different players in order to get this to trigger more than once. Bestoke Battle Wagon. This thing is actually pretty nuts for an uncommon. It's just very strong. 4 mana for a 5/6 artifact vehicle token, or artifact vehicle. And you can tap it, gain 2 energy, and you can do that right away because it's not a creature. It's a crude vehicle, or just a straight up vehicle. Or you can tap it to pay 2 energy, tap target creature. Or you can tap it to pay 3 energy, draw a card. Or you can pay 4 energy and it becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. So it's just very versatile. Just being able to just tap it to get energy, tap creatures is really relevant in combats. Being able to draw cards. Unwinding Clock makes this really, really good, obviously. Unwinding Clock's a good card. Who would have thought? So yeah, very flexible, very strong card. Alright, Brass's Tunnel Grinder, 3 mana, legendary artifact. When it enters the battlefield, you can discard any number of cards, then draw that many cards +1. And then at the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, put a board counter on it, and then if there are 3 or more board counters on it, you remove those counters and transform it. You've descended if a permanent card is put into your graveyard from anywhere. This card is just really good, even if you just don't do the descended part. But if you do, it turns into a land that says whenever you cast a permanent using mana produced by Ekoltlan, the Searing Rift, discover X, where X is the spell's mana value. Obviously, that's a good effect. But actually, what you can do is you can sacrifice this, and then bring it back with Goblin Engineer and Goblin Welder, and just kind of draw a bunch of cards. You fill your graveyard with a bunch of stuff. So even if you don't descend it, it's still good. All right. Convergent Apparatus is it's a mana rock, but it is more than just a mana rock. Because you can pay 3 mana, tap it to get 3 energy counters. So it's a mana siphon into energy, which is really, really cool. Or you can tap it, pay 3 energy, and then add 3 mana in any combination of colors, which is very strong. So very cool, flexible mana rock there. Crystal Skull Isu, think of this like the jellyfish, the reality chip, but like slightly better because you don't have to have it equipped to a creature, but it doesn't do everything I think the reality chip does. So anyways, 4 mana for a legendary artifact. You may look at the top card of your library at any time. You may play historic lands and cast historic spells from the top of your library. Artifacts, legendaries, and sagas are historic, and then you can tap it to add a blue. So it's a mana rock in addition to being able to cast stuff from the top of your library, as long as it is a historic thing. So very strong. I like it. The reality chip's not in here because I don't like the dependability of having to have it grafted onto a creature. All right, Cursed Mirror. So you've got 3 mana artifact, tap it to add red, and then as it enters the battlefield, you may have it become a copy of any creature on the battlefield until end of turn, except it has haste. This is another combo with Felidar Guardian, with enter the battlefield, infinite, leave the battlefield, enter the battlefield for creatures. You can just have it enter the battlefield as Felidar, and same thing as the clone. Otherwise, it's just a very useful clone ability that turns into a mana rock afterwards, and then of course you can sacrifice it and then reanimate it to also have that clone ability come back, which is pretty nice. It's just very versatile, very strong with Goblin Welder, and even of course with Dr. Madison Lee being able to pay. She can reanimate stuff as well. That's another thing, is pay 5 mana reanimate. Okay, decoction module. It's a mana, or it's an energy battery basically. So 2 mana artifact, and whenever a creature enters the battlefield you control, you get an energy, and then you can pay for 4 colorless, and then return target creature you control to its owner's hand. There's a way to like be able to get enter the battlefield triggers over and over again. 4 mana is a bit expensive. It'd be kind of nice if it was 4 energy, because you're like gaining energy from this, and then it kind of fuels this. But the deck has a decent amount of mana rocks and a decent number of way to get mana, so it's not too bad. It isn't playing any of the fast mana. I just decided not to run it. I wanted to. You could run like, Mana Crypt and Mana Vault and all that, but I didn't bother with it. Gonti's Aether Heart, 6 mana for a legendary artifact. Whenever it enters the battlefield, whenever it or another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 2 energy. Very strong. Enters the battlefield, not cast, which is great. Then you can pay 8 energy and exile Gonti's Aether Heart to take an extra turn after this one. I would actually avoid doing this until you're about to win the game, or if you like really need to get out of a situation and it's like your only chance, because this ability here is just so strong. You'll want to just kind of save it for until you actually can like really like overwhelm the board with a bunch of creatures, take an extra turn, and then win. Otherwise, you just want to keep this around for that, and you can do this at any time. So like, it's not sorcery speed. It's great. Acre Wellspring, this is kind of just a value artifact. It might be a little out of place in this deck. If you want to run something better, it makes sense, but it's just a 2 mana. When it enters the battlefield or is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, draw a card. So a little bit of a draw engine if you can use it with like Goblin Welder, sacrifice to draw a card. You play it, it draws a card, you get the energy from Dr. Madison Lee, and then you can reanimate something with like Goblin Welder or whatever. You can use this for Goblin Engineer as well. Not great, but not bad. Is a Genitarium, 2 mana for an artifact. If you would get 1 or more energy counters, you get that many energy counters plus 1, which is very strong. There's a lot of single instances of energy in the deck, like Guide of Souls and cards like that, where like something enters the battlefield, you get a counter. This just doubles all of those, which is very strong. And then you can tap to draw a card only if you've paid or lost 4 or more energy this turn. Also a very strong ability. Draw engine, which is great. Very easy to turn on because you're almost always going to be trying to spend energy because it is an energy deck, so it makes sense. Is a Signet, just a mana rock. Lightning Greaves, just to protect your creatures. 2 mana artifact. Equip creature has Haste and Shroud, which is great. Equipped with cost of 0, which is fantastic. You want to protect your commander, most likely. Liquid Metal Torque. This one is mainly just a mana rock, but it does have tap. Target non-land permanent becomes an artifact in addition to his other types until end of turn. Very flexible card. You can turn other people's stuff into artifacts, so that like if it's like destroy all artifacts, you can like turn something that isn't an artifact into an artifact, then it dies. But then also with Dr. Madison Lee, she is not an artifact, but you can turn her into an artifact while you have Unwinding Clock on the stack, which is pretty cool. So yeah, just like a little flexibility, but it's also just a mana rock. Mystic Forge, very strong card for colorless decks. For 4 mana, you may look at the top card of your library at any time. You may cast your artifact spells and colorless spells from the top of your library, and you can tap it to pay 1 life, exile top card of your library, and it is an artifact, of course, in addition to its other types. Or not in addition, it's just an artifact. Anyways, just a very strong value engine. Shortcut Genesis Engine, also a very valuable value engine. I almost never crew this thing. It's just a 4-mana 8/8 legendary artifact, but it is a vehicle, and you can pay 1 colorless and tap it, draw 2 cards, then discard a card, and then you create a 1/1 colorless pilot creature token. With this creature, crews vehicles as low as power or 2 or greater. Literally just, I only use it for the draw ditch. The colorless pilot is nice, but it's not an artifact, so it's just paying just a chump blocker probably. But yeah, the draw ditch is very, very strong, and then chump blocker creator is nice. It is an artifact, which is great, and you could crew it if you wanted to. It's just an 8/8. It has no evasion, so it's not great. Simulacrum Synthesizer. This card is really strong. It's strong when you have like multiple copies of them, like in standard, but it's just very strong in this deck too, because it's a 3-mana artifact, and when it enters the battlefield, you get to scry 2. Good, decent value there. And then whenever another artifact with mana value 3 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you get to create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token. With this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. That means if you flicker an artifact with infinite number of times, you get an infinite number of constructs. Pretty good. We talked about that earlier with the Cursed Mirror, I think is what it's called. Yeah. So, stuff like that. Very strong. And of course, just the general value of just having any artifact that's 3 or more would come down and you just get a free construct. Very strong. Soul Ring, very good mana rock. Solar Transfer, this is another, it's a mana rock, but then also has the ability to gain you energy. So 2 colorless when it enters the battlefield tapped, which does suck a little bit, but you get 3 energy when it enters the battlefield, very strong. You can tap it, add a colorless, or you can tap it, pay an energy, and add 1 mana of any color. So decent energy value just for 2 mana. Mana rock there, mana rock there, mana rock there. The 3 talismans, pretty standard. You've got the Might and the Weak Stone, the Might Stone, the Weak Stone, 5 mana legendary artifact, Power Stone. I'm not playing the Urza Lord Protector. You could if you wanted to, but the backside is not that great for this deck. So I mean, the front side's decent, but the backside's not. So I wouldn't meld them, even if I did play it. But I didn't really want to play it. So whenever it enters the battlefield, you choose one. You can draw 2 cards, or target creature gets -5/-5, so it's kind of removal in the deck. But then you can also just tap it to add 2 mana, but it only can be cast, it's meant to cast non-artifact spells, or it has to be cast for artifact spells. Yeah, it's just a mana rock that you can kind of loop from the graveyard and get some value, or just a decent mana rock that has to enter the battlefield triggers. You can flicker it, even. The One Ring. This is actually funny enough, when I first made this deck, I forgot to add the One Ring. So my playtesting so far has consisted of not playing with the One Ring, but holy crap, why would you not play the One Ring? If you happen to not know what the One Ring is, it's a 4-mana legendary artifact, indestructible. When it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, you gain protection from everything until your next turn. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life for each bird encounter on the One Ring, and then you can tap it to put a bird encounter on it, then draw a card for each bird encounter on the One Ring. Very strong card. I don't think I need to explain much else. It does a lot. Unwinding Clock. I spoke about this multiple times during the deck tech so far. It's a 4-mana artifact. Untap all artifacts you control during each other player's untap step. Very strong. There's a decent number of mana artifacts and raw lands as well. So your lands will untap. Any of the artifact lands will untap. Any of your value engines like Shorkai. If you can make your, like I said, Dr. Madison Lee an artifact, you get value from that, which is very strong. Oh, and then that 4-mana vehicle, the blue one, I forgot what it's called, the wagon, the one that creates 2 energy and does all the other stuff. Having that every turn, really good. Aether Revolt. It's one of the only, I think there's 2 enchantments in the entire deck, because it's an artifact deck. Simple. So it's a 4-mana enchantment, has Revolt. As long as a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn, if a source you control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent or permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much damage +2 instead. I actually forgot about this. I forgot about this. This is funny. I was just playing with the bottom ability. I completely forgot about that top part. But the biggest part about this is whenever you get 1 or more energy, Aether Revolt deals that much damage to any target. There's a lot of different ways. Every time you cast an artifact, if your commander's out, that's just pinging things. Ping, boom, boom. And as long as you've had a permanent you control leave the battlefield, it just does 2 extra. Or it does, yeah, damage +2. Very strong. Lightning bolts all around. It is definitely a win con. Static Prison, solid removal. So for one white enchantment, when it enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent and opponent controls until Static Prison leaves the battlefield. You get 2 energy. And then at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, you sacrifice it unless you pay an energy. Very simple. You should be able to pay the energy almost all of the time. But if worse comes to worse, it gets rid of something for 2 turns, and that's probably enough. Now we're into the lands. A lot of cool lands. Academy Ruins, legendary land. You can put target artifact card from your graveyard on top of your library. So you can, if you get something in the graveyard you want to draw, and you're about to draw, boom, instant speed, put it on top, and you draw it. Pretty good. Aether Hub is just a energy land. When it enters the battlefield, you get an energy counter, and then it taps for a colorless or any color if you pay an energy. Ancient Den, artifact land that taps for white, very strong. The blue one's in here, and the red one's in here as well. Who would have thought? Archway of Innovation, when it enters the battlefield tapped unless you control an island. There's a decent number of islands in the deck, but you don't have a ton. But you can pay a blue and tap it, and the next spell you cast this turn has Improvise. Improvise is very strong. Your artifacts help you cast a spell, so very strong ability. Arid Mesa, just a fetch land. Battlefield Forge, dual land, or taps for colorless. These are nice to tap for colorless because you are playing a lot of colorless spells. So like it's a dual land when you need it, and it's a colorless spell when colorless land when you don't. Buried Ruin, colorless land, but it returns target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. If you tap it to sacrifice it, pay 2. So there's a little bit of recursion there. Command Tower, multicolored land, fetch land. Fomori Vault, very strong card. So it taps for colorless, doesn't enter the battlefield tap. It should be an artifact because it's a vault. Should be, I don't know, it just feels very artifacty to me. But you can tap it to pay 3 mana. Tap it, pay 3 mana, discard a card. You look at the top X cards in your library, where X is the number of artifacts you control, so you're going to dig real deep most of the time. And you put one of those cards into your hand, the rest of the bottom of your library in a random order. Very strong value card. Artifact land here. Dual land here. Helios 1, another very strong card. You can tap it to get an energy. I'm sorry, you can tap it to get a colorless mana, tap it to get an energy if you pay 1, and then you can pay 3, tap it, pay X energy, sacrifice Helios 1, and destroy target non-land permanent with a mana value X, activate only as a sorcery. I don't know why this is a thing. You're sacrificing it. I don't know why it's a sorcery only. I don't like that at all, but, you know, it is what it is. Inventor's Fair. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more artifacts, you gain 1 life. A lot of people forget about this. It's a legendary land. A lot of people forget about this, so remember that. You can tap it to add a colorless, or you can pay 4 mana, sacrifice Inventor's Fair, search your library for an artifact card, reveal it, put it in your hand, the shuffle, activate only if you control 3 or more artifacts. Not as a sorcery, funny enough. Basic Island. Minamu, School at Water's Edge, very strong legendary card. You can tap it to add blue, doesn't even come into battlefield tapped, which is great. You can tap a blue, just single blue, tap it to untap target legendary permanent. Hey look, your commander's a legendary permanent. Plus a couple other things in the deck, legendaries. So just very strong, synergistic stuff with your commander. No real downside. Oh, look at Mountain. I don't actually run that many basics in most of my decks. I think there's like, I mean, you can check the deck list, but I think there's like 3 plains, 3 islands, and 2 mountains. Because there's so many cool lands. Why would I want to play basics? But I'm forced to do it because people play Path of Exile. Basically, that's how I look at it. And Assassin's Trophy. Although I think Assassin's Trophy allows you to get duels. Anyways, Aurora, Soaring City, legendary land, taps for a blue. You can channel it, pay 4 mana, discard Aurora, then return target artifact, creature, enchantment, or planeswalker to his owner's hand. But it costs 1 less for each legendary creature you control. This gets around counter spells, unless it's like a Stifle, because it's an activated ability. And it's a very nice, flexible thing to have. So, highly recommend it. It's a little expensive at 20 bucks, but if you don't want to play it, just run an island. Plains, Plateau, Tri-land, Dual land. Oh, these lands here. I don't know if I'm 100% sold on these lands because I don't like enter the battlefield tapped lands, but it is an artifact land and they are indestructible and they are dual lands. So I'm running them because it's an artifact-centric deck, so it makes sense to run them. Same thing with this one. That's the same artifact, indestructible. That's just a dual land. That's a fetch land. Dual land. One of the artifact blue lands. This is the dual land that is indestructible, but it's also out of the battlefield tap. Don't love it, don't hate it. It's one of those things where I think it's necessary in an artifact-centric deck. Spire of Industry is just a taps for a colorless and taps for a mana of any color as long as you control an artifact, but you have to pay a life. Dual land there, dual land there, dual land there, and we're back to Dr. Madison Lee. A little bit of a long one, but I like to go in depth with most of my deck lists. And unfortunately, I won't be doing as many deck techs as I would like to because I'm not in any league right now, and I also don't play every single Thursday for Commander, which is a bit unfortunate. I'd like to change that, but at the moment, my brewing is kind of slowed down. But I built this for July 4th for, America Day, And yeah, so hope you guys enjoyed. Thanks for watching, everybody. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. See y'all in the next one.